Hi, everybody. Hello. I tried to control myself and not say the RuPaul hello, hello, hello thing that for some reason I just can't stop myself from doing every other week. My name is Sonia. I am a DJ, artist, writer, and general music jack of all trades currently based in Daegu, South Korea. This is What's Playing, the bi-weekly talk show where we talk to musicians, artists, DJs, and all sorts of music adjacent industry people all about what's on their playlist, what they're listening to, and just like general music conversation. It ends up going in a lot of different ways. Last episode with Bored Lord, we ended up spending a lot of time talking about radio, and I just realized that I am wearing the same shirt that I was wearing last episode. So big shout out Soul Community Radio and also internet radio in general. I'm very excited about this week's guest. It is somebody I've been following for a while. It is somebody who's talking about just like their connection with music and the process of looking for it has inspired me a lot and forced me to rethink a lot of the ways that I connect with my own music and how I look back at it. Because as Bored Lord said last week, you do have to look back in history a lot, and this is somebody that really puts that effort in. I've gotten a lot of really good recommendations of music from this person, mostly through social media, and I'm just really excited to learn more about the process of how to look for it and just what they're listening to right now. So let me introduce Valencia. He's an Indiana Midwest-based DJ, producer, cultural theorist, and techno historian who has been active in North American techno since 2010, which is a long time. In 2010, I was not listening to techno. I was listening to My Chemical Romance. He contributes to the long legacy of Black Midwest techno by exploring the many permeations and intersections of techno and other electronic dance music. So let me add my little banner in. I know last time we had a little bit of an issue. This time it'll work, I promise. And let me add my guest. Hello.
Yo, what's up? What's good? Good morning from Korea.
Yes, thank you so much. It is morning for me. It's 8 a.m. and it is, 4 or 5 p.m. for 4 or 5 p.m. for you?
Yeah, it's 7 p.m., so just like early in the night.
Oh, I didn't know Indiana was in Eastern time zone.
Yeah, we're like right on the line, so it's weird. Like people, they always think I'm on like West Coast or like Central time. I'm just like,
You're
no, I'm
on
just
like
like,
mountain time, yeah.
yeah, like right on the margin.
That's pretty funny. I'm always like, I wanted to get European guests for the show, but I never can because the time zone now is just like too. I'm not gonna make somebody wake up at 2 a.m. just to be on the show. So if I do want European guests, I'll probably pre-record them. But for now, I'm making my way through North America because I mean, there's such good pickings out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even with just like North American scene for like the first time, I would say in about maybe almost 10 years, like North American dance music scene is kind of bubbling up again. Like when I first started like going out or just seeing people play or whatever, I mean, it was a healthy scene, but it wasn't really like at the rate that you're seeing stuff happen now. So you get stuff from like all pockets of North America, whether it be like West Coast, East Coast, even like parts of Canada has been,
Yeah.
I mean, just popping for like the past 5 years. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been really interesting pockets happening because people used to think like, oh, just New York, maybe Chicago, maybe Detroit, maybe LA, right, Oakland. But now we're seeing like really interesting scenes come up in different places. Like I've had my eye on Columbus, Ohio for the last couple of years because they've had some really cool stuff happening out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of good DJs from there. Even if it's not from like the recent scene, I mean Ohio in general, there's always been like pretty good techno producers that come from there that sort of get like overlooked. You get people like FBK,
Hmm.
aka Kevin M. Kennedy, who's been active since like the mid '90s.
Oh wow.
Um, there's you get Charles Knowles, what's Tatantan Duvante, like those sort of guys that kind of they exist in between this space that's not quite techno but not quite house. I guess in the UK or a European context, it would be considered tech house. So it's been interesting to kind of see people like that finally get their flowers over time after just being like overlooked in the bigger cities like New York and LA, like you said.
Hmm. Do you think that location plays a big role whether an artist is successful or seen as relevant in their time?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, sure. So, like, I mean, if I was based in like New York or LA, obviously I'd probably be a little bit more relatively successful. But even with that, it depends on the time. Because I mean, if you look at New York right now, it's flooded with DJs. Like, there's a lot of
Yeah,
competition. So, I
what's going
guess overall, it just kind of comes down to quality and whatnot. Because I mean, you see big DJs, they will like live in a big city for a few years and then just kind of like
Then they
move
go
to a
somewhere
suburb.
smaller. They go to like Wyoming.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can still like tour off of that very much, you know, if you have like stuff established already. But I guess for me, I've never been in a rush to kind of just leave, mostly because of just like pricing and stuff
Yeah,
like that. And I feel like if you good enough, you could kind of shine out in the crowd without having like that access to that capital of big cities. You just have to be persistent. My entire career has been about persistence.
yeah. I think that I mean, you're also in a slightly better position than I would say like Canadians, for example, like because the States is so small and domestic travel is quite affordable. And in terms of like getting from, let's say, even Indiana to New York, like it's probably not too expensive of a flight. And you can plan a tour in the States. I talk about this a lot about how like it's hard to be
Yeah.
in Canada because eventually you reach a cap. Um, like traveling domestically in Canada is super expensive because it's huge and
And then
like
just crossing the border, don't you need like a visa to tour in North America and USA? Am I
yeah,
mistaken?
you
See,
you
I
need
can
it.
go to Canada and play like I've
Yeah,
done it plenty of times, and like they don't ask me for any type of visa. I would just tell them, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm DJing. They'll be like, oh okay. But for
maybe
Canadians,
they
you have to
thought you
pay.
weren't getting paid. Maybe they thought you were just doing it for fun.
Yeah, probably like a birthday party or something. But I mean, I've done that a criminal amount of times. And I mean, it's just like whatever. But so don't, as a Canadians, you guys have to get permits to play in USA.
Yeah, my understanding is that if you're Canadian, you're gonna go like work in the States. You need like a certain kind of visa. I know a lot of people if they'll do just like one night or whatever, like they'll just show up because if you're coming back, um,
Oh,
right? But if you're doing a tour, like you definitely should get a visa. But in terms of like the free travel, like is even if you wanted to do like an illegal tour or whatever, Canadians can stay in the States for 6 months without a visa.
oh, that's yeah, that's pretty good. That's the same
Yeah.
with us. Like in United States citizens, most countries they'll let us stay for 6 months before they just kick you out and you just
Yeah, then
reset
they're
it.
like, yeah, you reset it, you like hang out outside for like 2 weeks and then you go back.
You know, speaking of Canadians playing in USA like illegally, that actually has defined a lot of like famous Canadian DJs' careers, specifically like Richie Hawtin,
Yeah, I was gonna say
because
Richie Hawtin is a big one for sure.
yeah, he got like banned from USA for what 10 years, and that actually affected his music so much that it became so minimal. And then once stuff, the band like opened up, he moved to New York City, and there's like a specific scene of people that moved from Windsor and Detroit to New York City in the late '90s and early 2000s. Richie Hawtin,
Mhm.
Magda, even some people, Mike Servito, I would consider him with that sort of crowd, and even Kevin McHugh, aka Ambivalent.
Yeah,
They so like when minimal techno was like blowing up, like micro house, a lot of people moved to New York for maybe about 3 years, and then everybody just left New York City and moved to Berlin, and so that's where you get like that sort of like specific sound like Club Der Visionaire, all that. It comes from like people they just kept like migrating, and this is like when Berlin was like super dirt cheap, like you could
mhm.
just like squat there for months on end. It's super interesting how migration kind of like affects that stuff.
Yeah, and how like the resulting migration made everyone think that like techno or like Berlin is where techno came from.
Yeah, for sure.
Because everybody took it from Detroit and then brought it there.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that's when they started popping up. But I was talking to Jean Hugh, Amazing Agent, and he said that what did he say? He said that Berlin's getting too expensive and everyone's moving to what Leipzig now. How do you say?
Ah, yeah,
Yeah,
Leipzig. Yeah, that's
Leipzig. Yeah,
correct.
apparently that's the new Berlin. So you heard it here first. Move there instead.
I always felt like Montreal was Berlin. Like to me, Montreal feels like Berlin a bit in terms of just rent and
Oh yeah,
art
would you
and
live there?
culture. Yeah, I like Montreal. I don't. Yeah, I have a really strong tie with Canada. For some odd reason, when I first started touring and playing out, just I would get booked by Canadians so much. I remember one year I was in Canada maybe like every other month or so. Yeah, like
No
people from
way.
just like Montreal just kept like bringing me over, and I would like one time I spent like almost 2 weeks there in the middle of winter. It's pretty humbling.
Cool.
It's crazy.
Well, if you ever want to come back to Canada, I have some people that definitely be interested in booking you, so we can talk about that after.
Yeah,
Especially now the borders are opening up. But I did have some questions for you that I wanted to ask. So, I said in the beginning of my intro last episode, I talked to Board Lord. We talked a lot about music history and how it's important to dig back. I know that's a big thing of your process as well. I was wondering, do you think that it's possible to like succeed or be, in a very like vague word, a good DJ without looking back into history? Um,
yeah, definitely. I mean, there are DJs that I listen to. I mean, I could tell by what they're playing. They're probably just playing everything that was released maybe a week or two ago, and like on all the streaming sites. But even with that, it kind of comes down to, even though like the stuff they're playing is new, they still sort of like know their music intuitively. Because I feel like when you're taking time and digging for older music, you actually have to sit and like listen and look at the labels, the year it came out, like understand like very specific reference points to how
yeah,
that connects to the present. Cause I mean, like, even though I put a lot of emphasis on digging for like old techno and playing it with new stuff, the way that I'm doing it, I'm using older music as a reference point to kind of like connect to older stuff. So for example, right now the big trend is playing like really super fast 140 bpm techno.
oh
So like
yeah,
when I hear people playing that style of music, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm like, something immediately clicks in my head. I can dig through my collection and be like, okay, well, since this is an established form of techno that has happened in a trend before, I can go back into my archives and pick out some records that kind of like fit into
yeah.
new stuff, just to kind of like spice it up, you know? Because to me, it's really easy to sit and play new stuff, but if you can play like the new stuff with some old stuff, it kind of like makes you stand out a bit, you know? It makes
Mhm.
your sets resilient and like they age pretty well over time.
Yeah, because it makes it like almost like a little smarter too, because you can see where these connections are being made, where these bridges are being drawn. I'm definitely guilty of only playing new stuff for a
It's
while.
tempting. Like, I mean, I sit every week. I mean, I'm like, I would sit and check like all the record stores every week, every other day or whatever, and just like flip through all these new releases. I'm like, dang, like I could just like play every single track from this compilation and get away with it without really like thinking, you know?
Yeah, because it's good. Like the new stuff's coming out is good. A lot of it is like almost like reminiscent of old stuff. Like you can tell the artist has like references and is like trying to like mimic certain styles. So you can almost be like, oh, this sounds like it's from like the 80s. Let me like sneak it in.
Yeah, that's how I put together sets. So like I would say, for example, I would hear somebody release something that came out yesterday and it would have a specific sound. Like the way that I DJ, I would hear it and I'd be like, oh, I know what this sounds like. This sounds like something that was made in 1995 on Trezor or whatever. And I would like
Yeah.
flip through my collection and like piece it together. So that's why, for people who have like listened to my sets, you notice in certain points of the sets for like maybe 15 to 20 minutes, everything will sound like one tune, because like what I'm doing, I'm taking like 3 and 4 different tunes at a time that
Hmm.
sound similar to each other, and I'm literally just like playing them after each other, kind of like make a cohesive narrative before maybe taking a left or like right turn. Like every single thing is very, it's planned. Like it's sort of, I call it like a controlled chaos or maybe a
Right.
calculated risk. Yeah, it's not, definitely not off the top of the head. Everything is like calculated down to
So,
the
so you
EQ
don't
and
wing it. You don't just show up to
yeah.
the set with a USB of random stuff, and you're like, "Well, let's hope for the best."
I mean, even if it's random, like so, like the way that I put my sets together, I always give myself two options. So, for example, because sometimes you'll show up to a party and you'll be hell bent on playing like, certain tracks or this playlist that you made last night, and the vibe could be completely off. So you got to be completely prepared to just do a 180 and play other stuff. So what the way that I put together my sets, it's like I'll have like one option, and then I'll have like a backup option, and then like outside of that, say if I'm playing like back to back with somebody, I'll have like tracks that I know that could like fit with the person, whatever. I guess for me, even though everything is sort of planned, like the way my playlists are, it's pretty much so I can like adjust to the room or party. So like for example, um in the upcoming week, I'm playing with Mike Servito.
Yeah,
So
very
like a
cool.
lot of what I do, I actually learned this. Well, I kind of connect with other artists this way. Like a lot of what I'm do, like my art form is research based. It's just like constant research. I learned that from like photographers and just learning like graphic design using references. So for example, I'm playing with Mike Servito. So I know him as a DJ. He plays a
Mhm.
lot of like jacking, really like dirty Chicago house. He doesn't really play fast. He plays around maybe like 122, maybe peak at 128 BPM. So recently I've been playing faster. So I'm guessing maybe because I'm playing with him, I'm going to have to play a slightly slower, a
Right.
little bit more groovier. Maybe I could play like some Midwest classics or whatever, like EBM or post punk perhaps, or kind of like leaning into Chicago stuff. And because I'm opening, you kind of like want to compliment the headliner. There's so much that you think about like when you kind of
Yeah.
like get deeper. And I feel like a lot of new gen DJs, they don't really think about it that way, because I get it, with like Instagram culture, it's easy to just like message all your friends or whatever, get like all the new bangers and just be like completely selfish. But I feel
Right.
like when you kind of study the art form or just like sit in a club watching really good DJs play, you kind of like internalize it to this next level. It's like research. It's like, oh, okay, this is how this fits together or whatever. It's into, I feel like maybe in some way I'm probably copying stuff that I've heard over time and just trying to put together in a way that I feel works together. I'm trying to like copy different moments in time, but that's sort of like what works to me. I find joy in the research of like looking for music.
Yeah, so it sounds like your sets are like fairly meticulous. And I think it's like great that you think about your role as the opener too, because like being the opening DJ is very different than being the closing DJ. You have to come with a totally different track list, whether you're playing at 10 p.m. or like 4 a.m.
Yeah,
Like
and you
I
don't want to tire people out. Like, you don't want to like,
too early, right?
I mean, as
Uh,
much as like it's fun to probably play like some super banging stuff at 10 p.m., like is you're probably going to be playing to a half empty club and people are going to be walking in. You want to kind of like slowly introduce them to things. You don't want to just like oppress people on a dance floor with just like banging it out, before peak time.
yeah, like I'm not trying to go to like the lounge and hear like a 5 a.m. set at 11.
Yeah.
I want to calm down first and then maybe, like I need to be seduced in a
Yeah,
way,
you
right?
have to win
Like,
people over. Yeah.
like it's like foreplay in a way, right?
Yeah. I like that you describe it in those terms, because I always say that like when people ask me, they were like, "What sort of techno or whatever you play?" I always say I like to play very sexy techno, like
Mhm.
stuff that makes people want to dance and have fun, but like not hitting them over the head. Like I want people to like feel good, like have a groove in their body, and like they're having fun. Like I don't want to like flex on people and like hit them over the head. It's just like, no, I'm trying to kind of like win you over, like it's like foreplay or whatnot.
Yeah, like I'm not trying to like scare you. I mean, granted, I do
Yeah,
like some of the scary techno too, like that
me
really like
too.
stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's fun. It's fun to listen to. But again, like there's a time and a place. And I think that I agree. I think sometimes people can forget that there is a time and a place, and people are very hyped up to just play whatever it is that they have. But if you're
Hmm.
playing a party, and especially if you're playing with other people, like you do fit into a larger body, right? Like
Yeah.
not just you alone. Where if you have a mix and it's standalone, you can do whatever you want. Like my mixes are super chaotic, and I really just go all over the place with them. But like if I'm playing an event, or even if I'm playing radio, to be honest, like I don't usually make them go as chaotic.
Yeah,
As
it's
I
called
would in-
programming. And I mean, that sort of curation, it's always been there. If you listen to like older people from Chicago and Detroit, the way that they describe DJing, they call it programming because you're
Right.
literally like programming a set. Like if you listen to videos of Frankie Knuckles, I forgot the other guy from Paradise Garage, Larry Levon. Like if
Yeah.
you listen to them describe the process of putting together a DJ set, they literally say like I'm trying to program a good set for the night. So like every single step, it's curation. It's not just bangers and stuff. It's very like meticulous, and I often feel like maybe that part of the art form is maybe it often gets kind of like lost in the fog, but that mostly that happens to do with social media because like we hyper consume stuff and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, I think it's nice to kind of think about it in terms of like almost like a movie or TV show. Like I don't start right away with like the plot, right? Like I drop in, I get to know the characters, we see what the situation is. There's like a peak, a climax, and then there's like an ending, right?
Yeah,
And I think it's nice to think about DJing in that way too, because at the end of the day, like, are you not trying to tell a story with the selections?
yeah, it's a narrative, and I feel like because this art form, I mean, like dance music is old now. Like techno, as much as techno presents itself as something that's futuristic, yo, techno is old. Like it's this art form has been around
For a long
since the
time.
late 80s. Yeah, this is like 30 plus years. Like, yo,
Yeah.
like a lot has happened since then. And I feel like
Techno's a millennial,
because
guys.
yeah, we have so many resources and like so much music, you kind of gotta like step it up a bit, you know? It
Yeah.
sucks, but hey, that's what it is.
I mean, especially now, there's so many DJs out there. Like, do you not want to be like doing something slightly different? Like, you're right. Like, the trend right now is playing
Oh
really,
my
really fast.
god. Yeah, it does annoy me. Like it's like even like if I see a trend, I mean most trends I can play on it, but I always feel like I gotta hit it with my own sort of style. So like since
Mhm.
the trend right now is 140 BPM, you, let me take that back. Be so like observe, you can like learn a lot about trends even without necessarily like being in a club. Like
Mhm.
Instagram, it gives you such an insight on what people's playing because like everybody's posting videos in the club and you have like these super big repost pages, and so like you could get a real good insight of the club landscape of what people are playing. So like when you look at stuff like that, the trend that I see right now is like people, they're playing really fast techno that's super like dark and menacing. So
Yeah.
for me, I can play along on the trend, but I always want to hit it with my own style. So since I
Right.
see people playing, they're playing like all this dark techno that's fast. I was like, okay, I could play fast techno, but let me play like some groovy, some funky, some colorful techno as to sort
Mhm.
of like offset or have a conversation. It's just like, hey, like this is me, like standoffish. Like I could do that too, but with like my own style. So I
Yeah.
always try to be like the antithesis, or like the way I play. I want to play house better than the house people, and I want to play techno better than the techno people. And like people often describe the way I DJ as house that sounds like techno or techno that sounds like house, because I'm trying to
But
kind of
not, but
like,
not tech house.
yeah, I mean I like tech house too. I often feel like that's a misunderstood genre, but we can go into
I
that later.
agree. I agree. I was actually going to ask you to talk about that in a bit. I do have a question though. Like we talked about the club scene, people post videos from all around the world. We have possessions, like Hor Berlin, like everything. Do you find that because of social media that like the club scene has almost kind of become like flatter, and we can like if I go to a club in New York and I go to a club in Berlin, like could I expect to hear similar things? Because the
Yeah,
influence is so like because I'm online in Korea, right? And I'm seeing people post their sets from Paris, from Berlin, from Stockholm, from New York, right? And I'm hearing a lot of the same stuff be shared within those communities, right?
yeah, for sure. It's like it's almost people copying each other. I mean, I don't have any qualms against that. I feel like actually, I mean, like literally 80% of art is copying. You're trying to replicate
Yeah,
something
everybody
that maybe
copies.
but you have to kind of like add your own style to it, you know? And I feel like because the element of not knowing your music or digging and studying is why you get people kind of like replicating the same thing. And I feel like, so say for example, if somebody in Paris playing like Possession, big room, fast, dark techno, for someone if you actually know your music, you could be like, okay, let me take some of those tracks and play it with like some early 2000s hard groove that's a little bit like
Mm,
more funkier and melodic. Like you could add some style into it, but everybody's just sort of like copying with no sort of historical context to the point where like stuff is almost sounding revisionist. I literally heard somebody on Twitter a few days ago. They were like, they said that early 2010s techno was lifeless and grooveless. And they compared it to like the fast stuff, and they said the fast stuff is groovy. And I'm just like, no, like, do you live under a rock? I was just like, the early 2010s, like, there were so many people making we don't even have to put techno in that equation. Like, yo, the early 2010s, there were people making like some of the most amazing deep house. And then you
true.
had people that used to make dubstep, and they were experimenting with making more four to the floor dance music that was sounding like incredible. You know, you get like people like Joy Orbison that's like born out of that, or even like DJs
Yeah,
like Ben
gorgeous.
UFO that come out of that sort of like post dubstep, and or producers like Pangea. I mean, I could like name all sorts of people, and they were making dance music that wasn't lifeless. It's just like weird. I guess when people don't have no historical context, or they're not sitting and studying things, they kind of say like these weird revisionist takes. It's just like,
Yeah.
bro, like this is not it at all. Like,
Do you think that like even words like lifeless, like I feel like music is so subjective, like it's so personal, right?
yeah,
Like anyone
yeah,
could be like, oh, like it sounds so boring and lifeless. Like I know a lot of people that don't like techno because they don't understand like what's so appealing about it because it can be very repetitive. Some people just are really attracted to it and others aren't, right? Like I'm a big country music lover
oh,
in
I actually
Paris.
like country music, but specifically like bluegrass stuff, like,
Yes,
yeah,
bluegrass stuff
that
is
sort of
amazing.
stuff.
I mean, if we didn't have all of that stuff, we wouldn't have the music it is today, right? And I think that's why looking into history is important because, like, I see, like, in Toronto, like, I used to know a lot of guys in the techno scene, and they would say things like, "Oh, I fucking hate disco," and I'm like, "Okay, well, like, so you're racist and homophobic, and if you
Yeah.
didn't have disco, you wouldn't have techno, right?" Like, but they didn't even like connect the two because to them, disco and techno are two totally separate genres.
Yeah, and a lot of those connecting points is what sort of gets erased in these sort of these like capitalist corporate narratives, because everybody's running to jump on this trend. And I feel like the way I DJ, I'm definitely like even when I'm looking for records, I don't look for like, I'm not looking like directly at the structure, but rather like the bricks that hold the structure together. So like when I'm looking for tracks or DJing, like the way that I DJ, I'm literally looking for tracks that exist in between these genre points or whatever, to sort of like build up to a narrative, which is why I really like mixing like house into techno or whatever.
Yeah,
Because if you just listen to like specific qualities like a hi-hat or a certain synthesizer, you hear it in a slower track and you hear it in a faster track, and you're like, oh, let me connect these two qualities that sound similar together and like meet them at a middle point by adjusting like the BPMs and stuff like that. That's how I'm sort of like putting together sets. I'm like literally like looking at these middle points.
yeah, like what comes between the cracks and stuff. Because I mean, like there is a lot of genre. I feel like I talk about this a lot in interviews too. Like there's a lot of like genres, but these days, like it also is becoming flatter and smoother. Things are very genre fluid, and that's where we get things like with these broad terms like tech house, which for some reason people get really mad at. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, tech house is probably like one of the most bastardized dance music genres of the
It's just such
last
a
20
vague
years or
term.
so. Yeah, it is. I get why it's becomes evil, because it's like it basically became lost in translation. So tech house, I mean, it comes from London. I think South London. A lot of people like associated with clubs like Fabric and whatnot,
Yeah.
Craig Richards. Um there's another person that I'm thinking of. I'm actually going to pull them up because this their name needs to be like, people need to know this person's name so they can like look him up. It's like, pull him up on a playlist. Okay, Terry Francis. So people like Terry Francis or whatever, in London in the late '90s, early 2000s, um, when kind of like big corporate techno was having a moment, the first wave, we're in the second wave of like this corporate techno. A lot of people, what they do, and they were throwing like underground parties, and they were playing deep house records from Detroit and New York City at faster speeds. So they were playing like a lot more groovier, minimal deep house, and maybe like 128 BPM. And so these guys, DJ sets, they were so smooth and so subtle and so sexy that I think when producers started producing music to kind of fit these sets, the way that they heard the DJ sets, they were trying to emulate it. So you get like tech house because it's techy, but it's not like in your face techno, but it still has the groove and like the fluidness of house music. And then you sort of get like the tech house sound. And then over time, I guess when DJs started getting places in like Ibiza, all that obvious stuff gets more mainstream, and then it gets lost in translation. And then the stuff that people call tech house now, it's not even like remotely close to what was originally called. It just sounds like some weird generic like Beatport top 10 bros wearing V-necks, like harassing women on the dance floor type music. You know, like some like Jamie Jones type. I'm like, yo, this is just some other stuff.
I mean, that being said, like genre does evolve over time. Like our techno of today, right, is I think like much different than the techno of maybe like the 80s and 90s, right? So genre does change over time. So like maybe our definition of it evolves too. But it is interesting to see how big the jump can be.
Oh, for sure. I mean, even with like right now with like trance, even just a lot of stuff that people are calling trance right now, I'm just like, yo, that's techno. Like, I mean, at certain points in the late 90s, people were like releasing techno. There would be like like if you dig for records, if you look at stuff specifically from like 97 to maybe 2002, 2003, like people were releasing techno on trance labels. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, back then people were calling it techno, but I guess kids now they will call it trance. It's just like I don't. It's weird, like how stuff gets sort of like lost in translation.
Right, and then records kind of like disappear because they get mislabeled, right?
Yeah,
like you go to the
yeah.
store and then you're looking at like an underworld record, but it's in the like trance section.
Yeah, exactly. Like underworld, like to me, that's trance. You know, I mean techno to me.
Yeah,
Or
like, I would call it techno too, but like I think like I have like the single two weeks off, right? And I think I found it in like the trance section. And I was like, oh, that's like such a unusual place for it. Like I wouldn't have put it there myself.
or sometimes too, you would find it in like progressive. Like people would call it
Yeah.
progressive, and I'm just like, I mean, a lot of stuff that people call progressive, like to me, that's just like melodic techno. It's good techno.
Yeah.
It also too, it kind of like comes down to you can't always listen. Even some of the stuff I say is often crazy. You can't always listen to like these sort of like preconceived notions about dance music. Sometimes you have to just sit and flip through stuff. Like some days, what I like to do outside of digging for like, like the normal record stores that I check, I would like go on Discogs and I would click on Trance, the year 2003, and just like flip through a lot of garbage. But maybe sometimes I will find a track. I'm like, hey, this sounds nice. And then I would like play it in a set. And people be like, where'd you get that? I'm like, oh, this is like a dollar bin record it's stuff like that which keeps me digging, like finding those gems in the sea of like trash or whatever.
Dollar bin records are always good. Sometimes you can get some real nice gems. I got some sweet Celine Dion ones out there from the dollar bin, but sometimes you get garbage. Most of the time it's garbage, unfortunately.
The funny thing about dollar bin records is like a lot of popular records that you hear the top 10% DJs play. Like sometimes if you like look at their sets on YouTube or Instagram, people they'll be like, oh, track ID. Like because these DJs are so popular, they could take a dollar bin track and play that. And then a few days later, you go in Discogs, people are selling it for like $80. Like
True, yeah.
it's crazy how stuff gets like hyped up, like when it gets into the right hands. But I guess it's all about how you play it. And if you play it well, you can make the wackest or the most unknown sounding track like sounding popping,
Yeah, well, that's like there's like the weird like power of like being a musician or just being like a popular figure. Like my partner's really into BTS, And I remember like one of them did an interview and he was like, "Oh, this is like my favorite kombucha," just like offhand comment. And it's sold out everywhere in Korea. And he did another interview and he was like, "Guys, I should have never told you because now I can't find my favorite kombucha everywhere," right?
Yeah,
Like
it
the fans
happens.
will go wild about stuff, and it's not just BTS. Like it can be any like random obscure artist having some sort of influence.
That's
Um,
why I love sharing music because like something that I learned from the elders is back in the day they used to have record sharing pools where you would have like maybe 5 or 10 guys or whatever.
yeah,
You would be a part of a record pool. You have to go to the record shop and you get first dibs on stuff. And I feel like me and my friends, we share like specific tracks with each other. We'll be like, oh, this is like a banger. It'll be like some weird cheap track from like the 90s or something, and then
mhm.
like we'll keep playing it and it'll get like popular. Like yo, straight up, like there are like really big DJs that message me like 24/7. Like you would be so shocked who hits me up to like trade music or just like asking for like recommendations or like trading like bangers or like unknown, or we'll even like trade rips. Like I will buy a record and rip it to digital and be like,
Right.
oh, do you need this or whatever, and it kind of like gets
It's
shared
so
there.
it cycles through the community, and then so people will hear it in other places too. So that song,
Yeah.
even if it's like if it started out some like random song that nobody's heard in 20 years.
One time I played a record like this really it was just, well, it's not unknown, but I feel like nobody was playing that before me. One time I played this track by Mark Flash. He's a Detroit producer, makes this like super funky, kind of like Brazilian sounding techno music. I played this
Mm.
track by him called Dark. Um it's called, let me look it up. Mark Flash, Dark Symphony. I swear, I played this on a mix on Rinse FM. This was like 2 years ago, and then after that, I heard multiple big UK DJs, like people in the top 10, was playing it, and I'm like, I know for a fact that somebody must have like sent them my mix, or they was like listening to me because they
Yeah.
follow me, and I was just like, dang, so like this track it got popping because like it's just like little things you could just
God.
like people
Hashtag
start.
influencer.
Yeah, you'd be surprised, yo. Like there's so much stuff that it like that gets like shared, people to watch, and social media kind of like amplifies that. Even if
Mhm.
it's just like I'll post something on like my Instagram story, like a record, and I would look and I'll be seeing like these big DJs, they be like watching or whatever. They won't message me, but they be like looking at the story, and I'm like, I see you. You about to like steal this record. If I hear it in your set, I know you saw it from me first. You know?
Yeah. I always listen to the stuff that you post. I've got some really good tracks from your Instagram. I don't usually play them because a lot of them I just keep for like my own listening, and sometimes they don't fit into my sets. But I've got some really, really good recommendations from your Instagram, and I think it's awesome that you share it because, like, some people are really whack about sharing track lists,
Yeah.
and I think like I'm like you're literally getting paid to play somebody else's music. The least you could do is at least tell people what it is.
Yeah, so people can like support that artist and like buy their music.
Right.
And I feel like if you a good enough DJ, you
You
don't need
shouldn't be
to
worried about
hide.
other people playing the same music as you because you can play it in different ways. Like you can have the same song, but you're never gonna have the same set.
Yeah, exactly. Like I mean, I could play a set of all classics, but I'm not gonna play it the same as somebody else. Everybody has like their own interpretation. And like some of my
Totally.
favorite DJs, they share their music like 24/7 what they're playing. Cause I feel like if you're that good, you don't why are you hiding? Like I don't need to like hide. This ain't no exclusive. Like, and even if like I feel if it's like a track or a record that maybe somebody pressed 10 versions of it and somebody can't buy it on Discogs or whatever, I'll like rip it and send it to a person or whatever. I don't really see the
Mhm.
big deal. Like why would you want your music to be inaccessible, you know?
Yeah, like you want more people to enjoy it. We have a question in the chat. Somebody says, Blue Baby Pangolin says, what do you think is missing from the scene these days?
Ah, longevity. I feel like
Of artists or
because
music?
of sets,
Mm,
because the way stuff is like it's so corporatized, or just like we hyper consume stuff. You like DJ sets are so short. Like I'm really sick of these sort of like hit it and quit it 50-minute sets. I mean, like ideally you can't really tell a story in 50 minutes, and I
right.
feel like because everything is so compact, it forces people to kind of like rush when they're DJing. Like, like DJing is like a narrative. Like you should be playing for hours on end, not this sort of just like,
Yeah, DJs used to play like for 8 hours.
yeah, not like this 50-minute like boiler room type stuff that pretty much has like taken over. It makes me so frustrated because you can't like it takes me 50 minutes just to warm up. Like if
Right.
I'm
Because you're
yeah,
getting
like
into it.
yeah, it's like you're rushing something.
You mentioned the corporate techno. You talk about it a lot. Like, can you define that for us? Like, what does that mean to you, corporate techno? Like, we know boiler room, but like, is that part of it? Is that part of the problem? Do you think,
Yeah,
or is it
and
part of a problem?
I would say it's a part of a problem. The thing that's happening right now is that like a lot of people, rightfully so, they react against what's called business techno. But I
Yeah.
feel like the context that people are missing is this isn't something new. Even with like the EDM and how I corporatize stuff, like we're actually in the second wave of business techno. So in the late '90s, when there was a point in the late '90s or mid '90s when big labels they realized they could capitalize off dance music, which is why you would see like dance remixes of the most random artists, even like indie bands or whatever. You flip the record over, you get like a remix from Mark Kinchin or whatever. And a lot of people got paid like really good for those remixes, but then it got burnt out because a lot of people just they was like, oh, we're tired of dance music, like we want to hear something or whatever. And so stuff like shifted out of USA and you get like Euro pop, Euro dance or whatever. And then you get a specific form of techno. I call it love parade techno. So basically this is when festival culture comes in. If you ever go on YouTube and you look at like video, you type in Love Parade, you will see stuff from like 1998, 2000, huge festivals in Berlin, Germany, like thousands of people dancing in the street naked or whatever on like these
Yeah.
platforms, blasting the most like sterile kind of like poppy techno. Some of it is good. I like it. Um, and that was actually the first wave of like corporate business techno. People like capitalized off of
Right.
that culture, and the people that came out of that era, people like Carl Cox, Sven Vaith, DJ Tiesto. A lot of it was a lot of trance, and then
Yeah. Those guys
the
are still
big
around. They're still hyper relevant.
yeah, and they still make the most money. They're like literal millionaires.
Yeah, they're like at the top of that chain. Like Carl Cox, especially. Sven.
Yeah, and so that culture, that was the first wave, and I feel like we're in the second wave of business corporate techno. A lot of the key players who are at the top, or like Emily Lenz. I think of like who else? Even Nina Kravitz to an extent, because at a certain point, the EDM world it was like colliding with the techno world. You see like people like Ben Clock playing Tomorrowland and whatnot.
Yeah, I noticed those crossovers happening as well. Like, right, you have like Ben Your Phone, Ben Clock, and like all these people that you would kind of associate mentally with, like, I guess, a more like underground or more like subculture scene. And then they would be on these like major stages. And then like I remember like this was kind of when I was like getting more and more into like dance music as a whole. And I was like, oh, like, am I listening to like regular music? Like, is this because the thing is like EDM, even though EDM and dance music in general, like that whole like umbrella, it's still seen as subgenre by society, even though it commercially outsells every other genre, like to this day, because it's so vast, right? Like
Yeah,
what other genre has festivals at that magnitude of like Tomorrowland and Ultra and even movement, right? Like
yeah.
movement is enormous. It's
Yeah.
huge.
And the funniest part about even specific festivals like Ultra, even Movement to an extent, I think Ultra is like an offshoot of WWMC Winter Music Conference. And like
Yeah.
back in the day, Winter Music Conference was literally just, I mean, they would have parties in Miami in the smaller clubs, but it was more or less just like how the industry would network. Think of it like an art basel, but of dance music,
For
where you have the
music, yeah.
labels and distributors, they would exchange stuff. And then it just started turning into like this big money grab, like stages and stuff
Yeah,
and all that.
$500 tickets. Like,
Yeah, that's wild to me. And I feel
yeah,
like once you,
crazy.
I like festivals, but I feel like dance music at its core, it's music that belongs inside of the confines of a club or like a warehouse. Because like once you start,
Like a dark space.
yeah, once you start messing with the architecture of dance music, the way people play it, the way it's made, it changes drastically with like this sort of like open air stuff and all
Mhm.
that. And even just the way
Daylight changes it.
yeah, even the way people play their sets. Have you ever watched somebody play at a festival in the daytime and then see them play at night? You notice that the sets sound so differently. Where like with a festival, because your audience, they see you and you're like on the stage and they want to just like get fucked up, like have fun. You're probably gonna be playing just like bangers.
Yeah.
Where you playing inside of a confines of a club after hours, you want to weave people through a journey, take them on a like pace it. It's so many different little things, subtle cues
Right.
that influences how the music is played.
So what's like your favorite or ideal venue at the moment? Like that you like to
Um,
hear things at?
I mean, I haven't really gone out
Yeah, I'm
in
obviously
like a
pandemic.
year.
We haven't gone out in a while.
Mm-hmm. Um, hmm.
So like I guess from the past then, what's like a memorable venue for you?
Ooh. Honestly, a few years ago, I really liked. It was a party I played. It was in Bambi's in Toronto. It's a small. It's a small.
Bambi's.
I mean, like I like the sound system. I mean, it reminded me of like a small club in like Frankfurt, Germany, or something, or like like live at like Robert Johnson or something. I like the space. It was small, but it felt like quite intimate. I was like, oh, okay, this is a nice sound system. Obviously, the club doesn't exist anymore,
Yeah,
but I
I didn't know
like.
you played Bambi's, or maybe I did. Wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
this was like way back in 2017, 2018, I think. Yeah, I
yeah,
played with Ebony, with Andre. Yeah,
yeah.
it was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, big shout out to Bambi's. A lot of really iconic parties went down there. Really small space. I really enjoyed it. I think Cab must have been like 100 or less. It was very small.
Yeah, it's like I like kind of like smaller clubs. It
It
reminds
was like
me of
cave like almost.
yeah, it reminds me of clubs in Germany, like clubs in the Netherlands and whatnot. The clubs there are quite small because it's a small country, so like you really gotta make it count in terms of space.
Yeah. I had another question. I had something that I wanted to ask regarding like the festival stuff, but now I forgot because we started talking about Bambi's. So I'll ask you another question on my list. Obviously, sound selection is really important to you, and you do the opposite of me. Like I'll like roll up with a USB of songs I've like heard once, and I'm like, all right, like let's figure it out, let's see what happens. But you plan carefully and meticulously. Do you think it's more important, like the age-old question? What's more important, or what do you prioritize more? Is it technique or the song selection?
um, you know what? A long time ago, somebody told me that DJing is 80% taste, and then the rest of it is just technical stuff. And so I would say song selection. I mean, I don't really. I mean, yeah, obviously, like I'm a bit of a prick when it comes to like technical stuff, but I very much would rather hear somebody play like really nice, fun music than playing like it's boring stuff perfectly mixed. Like
Mm,
you're there to make people have fun. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's a balance. But I mean, I would say I lean more into selection for
right.
sure.
I kind of like hearing people like fuck up. I
Yeah,
in the way that I like hearing, like, when you buy like an album and you can hear like the person breathe in when they're singing, or like somebody's hands along the frets of the guitar, right? Like it kind of humanizes and brings it down to a regular level. It reminds you that like, oh, that's a human being, right? Like
and
that's
that
not
sort of music, it's fun to mix. Like playing music that was played by a live band or live and trying to mix that into something that was made on a computer. Like it's so fun when you're not stressed out, like when you're comfortable, because you have to kind of like ride the
yeah.
mix, and like you like fighting the mixer and the turntable, and it's like it's stressful in a fun way because it's just like, oh shit, like this live drummer, it's not quantized, so you have to like really like work it to the it's super fun when you like get it and get the mix down.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff out there. And yeah, like I don't know, like we're not gonna be perfect, right? Like even I'll submit
Yeah,
mixes that weren't perfect. Like I've edited some mixes after I record them after to like fix the mistake, but sometimes I'll just let it go a little
Just
bit.
leave. Yeah, I leave all my mistakes in my stuff. I'm
Like,
just like, I
you're
don't
a
care.
person, right? Like, I think there's a lot of pressure to be perfect in anything, and also including in selection. And sometimes songs just don't go perfectly together,
Yeah.
right? Especially some of the older ones, and also like older, like older DJs, like from when clubbing first started, like they were not good. Like it
No,
was all
it's
about the song selection. They didn't know what the hell they were doing. They were
playing
mixing
on like
records on
rotary
vinyl.
turntables.
Just chaos.
Yeah.
Nobody cared about BPM. Nobody paid attention to like trying to beat match it. They were just like, okay, well, I like this song and I like this song, so let's
Yeah.
try to transition, but in a very loose way. So I think that kind of set the precedent. Like now, even now, like does technique matter so much because you have access to CDJs that will just do it for you? Everyone
Yeah.
wants to
I don't
brag on
think
the sync
so.
button, but
Yeah.
I'd rather sync it and do a good transition and focus more on the next song, right?
I love hearing people fix their mistake in live real times. Like, you ever been in a club and like you can hear like a hi-hat slightly going off,
Yeah.
and like it's so cool hearing people sort of like fix it or like ride through the mistake. That's my
Yeah.
favorite thing to do. And like now I'm even getting to a point where like I feel so comfortable on a mixer that I'm starting to do like stuff like cuts, like
Oh,
fader
damn.
cuts, or like dropping stuff in, like this sort of like, I call it like it's not sloppy mixing. It's just like a Detroit style mixing where you just like you're playing in like certain elements. Like I will be playing like one record and I'm comfortable with it playing, and I'm like, okay, time to mix in the next record. So like what I'll do is I'll cut out like every single element except the hi-hat for an
Okay.
incoming record, and I'll be like playing it, and I'll like be pulling up the fader, like teasing it in.
Right.
Yeah, this is why I love like Detroit DJs, or even DJs like Ricardo Villalobos, or
Yeah.
even my friend Saoirse. She plays like that. It's like very it's not sloppy, but it's like a lot of flair. It reminds me of like jazz musicians, how they just kind of like improvise. It's so fun when somebody is like really comfortable. They just like playing, using the mixer as a literal instrument as opposed to just like robotic, fully
Yeah.
perfectly mixed sort of thing, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of people let effects kind of go to waste. I mean, there's some wild effects on these mixers. You can have a lot of fun
Yeah.
with them, and you can have a good time with the audience. But I think also a lot of pressure is sometimes put on making like the transition as smooth as undetectable as possible. Nothing wrong with that. I think Ben UFO,
Yeah.
like I'll listen to his sets and it sounds like one song,
Yeah, you can use
one
effects.
2 hour song.
I never, I mean, I'm someone, I don't really use the effects at all, but I'm starting to open up to it. I mean,
Oh,
you
I'm
can
an
use it
effects
to,
freak. I love
it's
them.
so fun. Yeah, like kind of like using it. I guess for me, I use it in moderation. You can use it to enhance like certain stuff. Like on my most recent mix that I did for Rinse FM, I was using like the filter. You can create artificial drops in your tracks if you don't feel like mixing two tracks together. You can like add an effect on it, and then
Yeah.
you like cut it out and then like drop in the new. Yeah, there's so many different creative ways to like use effects. I mean, you're only limited to your imagination.
Yeah. Yeah, you're limited only to your imagination, and also like, just don't let other people get to you. I think like even if you don't hear maybe other DJs doing like silly things, I think you should
Yeah.
allow yourself to do that. But we don't have a lot of time left, but I did want to ask you like the main point of the show, which is what are you listening to right now? Any recommendations for the audience?
Yeah. So I've been playing a lot of fast, deeper techno.
Okay.
There's a record by that I played in New York City. It's called 13-Year-Old Girl by Damon Wilde.
Okay.
Um, he's an older New York techno producer. Some other stuff that I've been playing a lot of stuff from this producer named Rove Ranger. He released a track on a compilation with Lady Starlight and a bunch of other people, and also someone who tracks specifically their remixes. Like all of their remixes are really good, but I really like this remix. It's by D Dan.
Mm-hmm.
He remixed this producer from, I believe she's from Ontario, maybe specifically Toronto. Her name is
Oh,
like
wow.
Adja. It's like
Oh
A
yeah, I think she's pronounced Adia. But yes,
Idea.
big shout out to her because she's taken over. She's got some fantastic releases, and I
This is
believe
a good producer. Like, damn,
she's an
like
amazing
really
producer, and
good.
I believe she's playing the just a quick local shout out here. She's playing the Toronto Boiler Room I believe it's in October with CL and I think even Ebony might be on that one. I'm not too sure.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, definitely if you're in Toronto, go check it out. I think Apollo is putting it on. So, if you've been to the boiler rooms in Toronto, they can be a lot of fun, especially the warehouse ones. So just like quick little local plug there for everyone out there. But yeah, Adia is amazing. Big fan.
Also, there's a producer that I like. I've been paying attention to. She's from Denver. Her name is Sofia. Like she makes really interesting. I don't know how to describe it. Like experimental dance music. Pretty
Okay.
interesting. Upcoming producer. I mean, honestly, like I'm flipping through stuff, hundreds of records, like every day. Maybe I could like make a playlist for this show,
I
or
mean, yeah,
like
make a playlist. Like, how do you find the time to look so much?
I mean, I do it it's such a habit now that I don't even have to sit and listen to a full record. I would just like
Okay.
flick through previews every couple of hours. I would just like check my stuff and like flip through my record collection or whatever. I guess you just get to a certain point, you could kind of like hear what you like. Also, another
Right.
producer that just came to mind is Max Watts. Really good upcoming North American producer. He makes very like groovy, loopy techno. Super
Nice.
interesting producer. His label ESP is quite good. They just released a compilation with some different artists. Definitely check that out.
Sick. I love compilation albums. You can get such good stuff from there. It's a really good way to like just taste test both the
Yeah.
label and the artist, right? Like, but sometimes it can be really easy to just play the whole compilation. So
And
I try not to play more than like one or two songs from compilation, like in a set or in a mix or whatever. But like sometimes the comps are just too good.
yeah, and then too, you could really get a good taste of a label via compilation. Like generally speaking, if I'm like flipping through a compilation and like every other track is like a banger or like sounding good, you'd be like, okay, this label, they probably
For
putting
sure.
out some good stuff versus like somebody that maybe has too many tracks in the compilation. It's just like, come on, guys, like maybe you should like spread that out across multiple releases, you know?
So true. All right. Well, we are running out of time. We have another show on air coming up at 8 p.m. Eastern. But I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. This conversation's been a lot of fun. I wish you could continue. Maybe one day we'll do a part two.
Yeah.
Any final like words? Where can people find you? Any upcoming show to plug?
Yeah. I mean, find me on Instagram, SoundCloud, obviously under my name. I have some upcoming shows playing in Smart Bar Chicago in the next week. After
Nice.
that, I'm playing a film festival in New York City after party, and then after that for New Year's Eve, I'm playing a rave. I can't. I'm not. I can't say the name. Like I don't want to. But like a very big artist. They not in dance music, whatever. They're hosting a rave. I'm supposed to be playing it for New Year's Eve. So hopefully
Amazing.
that goes through. It should be fun. It's gonna be crazy. So that's it for the end of the year. Other than that, I'm just like I'm looking for a booking agent. So like if any of y'all European people listening to this trying to get some insights, I know y'all lurking. I need to get signed to an agency and I'm looking for gigs in Europe and whatnot in 2022. So yeah,
Come to
get at
Asia.
me. Yeah, I would do Asia too. I'm actually looking into Australia too.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Well, wait till they reopen the borders.
yeah, lockdown's crazy over there.
Yeah,
But
it's a mess over there. But anyway, we gotta go. I only have 10 seconds left, so I'm just gonna do a very quick goodbye. Thank you, Onaire, for having me. Stay tuned for 8 p.m. for Beats by More at on here. And thank you so much for joining and talk soon. Good
thank
night. Good
you.
morning. Bye.